Matt Townsend with the overview and applications of the Dataverse connector. Thank you so much for being here, Matt. I will stop sharing.
Awesome. Hey, folks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Sweet. Let me share my slides here.
And Matt, feel free to take up as much of the time as you would like for this latter half.
Sure thing, sure thing. Yeah, looks like we have about 30 minutes left. Yeah, nice to meet everyone. Thanks for all your interest in the platform and these awesome questions here. And Jocelyn, I have to say that I almost fell off my chair with that demo. That was so awesome to see the dolly pieces and everything tied into an awesome canvas app. So love that demo.
Thank
Looking forward
you.
to try out some of those custom connectors and pieces more myself. Yeah, so jumping in, I'm Matt Townsend from Atlanta, Georgia, sharing some content about the Dataverse connector today. This is meant as a quick overview, and feel free to chime in the chat as I go along. If this, yeah, with any questions on this content, this is meant as a quick primer for anyone less familiar with the Dataverse connector. Definitely for other more advanced questions or other advanced ALM type scenarios. We do want to put out more tutorials and things around that. So if you have any questions for those types of things, please let us know what you'd be most interested in seeing. And with that, let me jump right into our content. So just to share, Dataverse fitting in with our low-code platform. So you're used to seeing our other Power Automate, Power Apps, Power BI, Power Virtual Agents, and now Power Pages and other pieces, right? As a set of low-code tools that span all of Microsoft, right? Azure, Dynamics 365, M365, and other pieces, right? These tools make it possible to build things that connect these simple apps and complex business apps that meet your workflows, combine data from across all these different sources, yeah, and help make things more efficient. Underpinning Dynamics 365 and all of our low-code apps is Microsoft Dataverse as a way to support not just these apps, but your extensions on these apps. So you can store data, build custom apps with different, rich business logic and integrations right within this app. It is more than just a data store. It's helping you, build views, build rich interfaces around this data as well. And today we're going to talk about how you can interact with this data source and these other operations from Cloudflows and from Power Automate. So there's two major scenarios that we'll show just to kind of get a picture of how these pieces go together. And I'll also cover, if you don't have Dataverse, how to get started, how to try out some of these pieces. The major two areas here are, you can include flows in Dynamics 365 apps and model-driven Power Apps. We have a flow menu where it's easy to publish Cloud flows that it can be triggered from any one of these contexts, making it easy to embed Cloud flows within any workflows you've created from these apps, whether it's Dynamics customer service, sales, other pieces you're using, or if you've just built a standalone model-driven Power App or other pieces, and you want to easily trigger flows directly from that app, adding other shortcuts or things, just using Cloud flows right from that context. The other set of scenarios are using the connector to automate your back office processes and set up integrations that do work on your behalf behind the scenes using Cloudflows. So all of this is built around our natively integrated Power Automate Dataverse connector, which is built a little bit different than other connectors. It's directly connected to Dataverse, so it runs faster and makes it easier to. You'll see some of the ways that you can not just use your connection when you're running the flow, but users running the flow can share their connection, and when the flow is triggered, you can have it operate in the context of folks, other users changing those rows and tables in Dataverse, have this connector use their identity for other steps in the flow, and kind of maintain those pieces. It's easy to respond to any changes in your data sources. So Dataverse, of course, you can use the built-in tables in Dataverse. You can add any custom entities if you're tracking, custom products, types of inventory, custom processes, or any of those pieces. You can add custom entities in Dataverse and manage those events. You may have seen the last labs call where Nathan Helgren and our Dataverse team was sharing more about virtual tables in Dataverse and some of the new ways that those can be set up so that Dataverse can actually reflect any data source in SQL directly as a Dataverse entity. So if you're building cloud flows, building apps that all interact with Dataverse, you don't need to have connections to those other sources directly, handle all those mappings and things in multiple places. You can do it all from Dataverse, where you've brought in multiple other tables, multiple other things to the same place, and you can automate all from that one set of tables. And the last piece we'll see in the demo here is around querying, creating, updating data in flows. It's easy to interact with Dataverse and call other actions there from that context. Yeah, let me jump to some demo content. Any questions before I jump over to showing some of the interface and getting started pieces? Okay, switch my screen sharing here. Okay, can everyone see this window?
The Microsoft Learn documentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, awesome. So just jumping right in, I did want to share this document up front for anyone who is diving into, whether you're at the beginning of your journey or diving into more advanced pieces. This documentation in this Power Platform adoption best practices area has a lot of great guidance around, spinning things up and scaling things up. So I wanted to call out this piece around environment strategy, just because, yeah, understanding which Dataverse environments you're using, and which context you're using the Dataverse connector from is really important as you get started. So just to share just a quick summary for anyone less familiar. In Dataverse, there's a default environment that's available by default within your organization's tenant. You can also create custom environments, and you may also have access to other environments that others have created or that are used as part of your apps. If your organization uses different Dynamics apps, has different, they may have one or more other environments tied to those other apps that they've already built. So when we talk about the Dataverse connector today, um, this Dataverse connector only operates within one of those environments. We're working on adding the ability for it to connect to other environments, making it easier to span those other pieces. So you can see here I'm working in my default environment. And if I were to go to the Power Platform Admin Center, that's admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com. I can confirm which environments that I have access to manage, which ones that I can access, and by clicking into this one, you can see this underlying environment URL for this organization, which, as you'll see, can be handy to refer back to sometimes as you're building different integrations with this specific environment. So for anyone getting started with Dataverse, you can use this Power Platform Admin Center to check which environments you have access to, manage your user access. You need, by default, you need an administrator, system customizer. If you're doing more admin type tasks, you need, within this, you can make sure that your user or other users you're working with have the environment maker role to make sure that they can create and run cloud flows in this environment. Just to show that really quick, this is a demo user. Right now, this user has the basic user security role as well as environment maker. So I know this user would be able to work with cloud flows, use the Dataverse connector, all these other pieces. If you do not yet have a Dataverse environment, you can start a new trial for different pieces. You can start a Power Automate trial and get access to these pieces. If you have Microsoft Teams in your organization, you have access to Power Automate within context of Teams. And if you're using a Dataverse for Teams environment, it'll show up as type Dataverse for Teams here. The Dataverse connector is always available from Teams for that usage. For other environments, you do need a premium license to use the Dataverse connector, which means one of the per user Power Automate, Power Apps, or other licenses. But if you don't have one of those, you can start a 90-day trial just from powerautomate.com or through one of the other Dynamics trial experiences that I mentioned. Yeah, so let's say you've successfully signed in here, created an environment, you have a context, you're ready to get started. Here I'm showing the Power Apps Maker experience. But I also want to make sure folks have seen the Power Automate URL itself. This is changed recently to be make.powerautomate.com. So this is your hub for everything Power Automate. You can also reach it through the Power Apps pages, but sometimes this embedding doesn't load as fast, so sometimes it can be helpful to go directly here to Power Automate. So yeah, let's look at a sample app. Here, I've created a very basic model-driven Power App. And just to show the steps to get here, if you're following along in the recording, would be from, I have too many app tabs open here, creating a new blank app based on Dataverse, and you see here it says model-driven app. This is creating a new model-driven Power App that uses these same view components and things that are common across other Dynamics 365 apps and other Dataverse-backed apps. So I created one of these, I gave it a name, and I selected a table. For this demo app, I selected the contact table type for this demo. So here you can see, I can manage these views, the sidebars, everything you can customize within Power Apps. But by default, from this context, I want to show two ways of interacting with your Power Automate flows from this app and kind of extending this app to have more automation. So we have a built-in flow menu from this experience. So for any selected records, this flow menu, oops, sorry, I've lost my assigning context. I'll show that over here. Sorry, from this flow menu, you can see any flows that you have that are related to this contact table entity. So here, I've already created one flow that has this context. But if you have a model-driven app and you want to easily publish a flow that anyone with access to this app can trigger, let me show the steps. So if you, from this experience, if you click Create a Flow, it brings you to a template. Using today, this trigger is only available in the Microsoft Dataverse legacy connector. We're working on bringing this to the current Dataverse connector later this year. But you'll click through this template. You'll select the environment that you're using. Right now, it's just default as the current environment being used here. You would select the contacts table and add other steps that you want to run whenever anyone receives this context from the flow. So from these other steps, you would have all of the details of this contact entity available for use in other steps. And you can add other Dataverse actions, other connectors to run from that point. So just to show an example here, this export context flow, whenever one of these rows is selected, it's getting the forecast and just doing a basic list operation in Dataverse. This could be extended to email a spreadsheet, take other actions from Dataverse, and so on. So let's say you've shared this app, you want to make sure that other folks can run this flow as well. This isn't just something you built for you, you want it to be available to your team. So if you find the Cloudflow you've created, you see I have a couple different sharing options here. If you share as co-owner, that's for folks you want to collaborate on the flow with. But if you're simply trying to share this flow in a way that other folks can run and use the same process, you want to go to run only users. Add those people, or you can add a group. I believe this can be either an AAD group or a group team in Dataverse to ensure that those users have access. Anyone you add here will have the same experience. If that trigger is being used, they'll have the same experience here where just by using that trigger and having access to view and run that flow, they'll be able to trigger the flow from this context, just as you, as the owner of the flow, can. And just to show here, if you have Dataverse steps in the flow that you want to run with the connection of that other user, right, rather than your connection as the user that set up the flow, this is also the area where you can configure that. So you can say, for any Dataverse actions in the flow, any other connectors, when that user clicks run for the flow, you want it'll prompt them for their connections, and here I'm seeing my connections being used, but based on those other options I was showing from the flow management page, they'll see they'll be able to provide their own connections, and their connections will be used for any of the steps in the flow. The flip side of this was for any other automatic process where you want to take more automatic steps in the background. So maybe you have a guest check-in process, or you're managing volunteers or things, and when one of these is added, you want to take other steps in the background. The Dataverse trigger, when a row is added, modified, or deleted, lets you easily respond to any changes to any table in Dataverse. Let me pull up the definition for that one just to show an example. So here, this is again a simple example just to show these pieces, but here I'm showing anytime you add a contact, and this is saying anyone in the organization. I could also say if I select user, this is any contact that I myself have added. The parent-child business unit or business unit are scoping that to specific parts of my organization that I may have set up within Dataverse. An organization is anybody at all. Any rows that are added can trigger this flow. I can say I can add additional filters here if there's contacts that only meet certain names, or if you want to if you're processing new feedback items and you want to add a certain query here to say just ones with a certain name or other pieces, you can limit all of that from the trigger here. And I'll share a cheat sheet with some great examples of all the different syntax to use here, and making that easy to filter in the links right after this. So you can see whenever a contact is added, here I'm saying any contact that anyone else has added in this organization. But then I've selected this option here for run as. So run as is saying for the Dataverse actions in this flow, just like we were looking at this from the manually triggered, I can say myself as the flow and connection owner, the connection being used for this trigger. I want the other Dataverse actions in this flow to use that context. I can say the user who modified that context, if it's the change type modified, or modifying user is the user who added or modified those pieces. I could also say the row owner if if there's a specific user in Dataverse that owns that account, owns that other data, and if other operations should be used in their context. So here, if I select modifying user, and I select this use invokers connection option, this is only for the Dataverse connector to let you choose which other Dataverse steps you want to be tied to this run as option. Then the other steps in this flow will use this user's identity. So if you had other steps sending email through Dataverse, adding other records in Dataverse, it would all be using their identity. So here, just to show when a new contact is added, maybe they're doing field work or some other pieces, and it's important for this contact entity to always have a snapshot of the current weather as they're working. So we can say get the current forecast, and then we're going to add that forecast as a note to that record in Dataverse. So just to show what that looks like, you can see for this John Doe record that I created a moment ago, you can see it just attaches this note that says current weather, sunny skies, high of 65 in Atlanta going through. So this is a simple example with the weather, but you could easily see how, if you're receiving an email, receiving other context, you can take in the context of that item coming in, perform other actions in Dataverse based on that, I've seen some great examples around using the new ChatGPT and OpenAPI endpoints to summarize different emails, things and coming in. So, when you're adding these other pieces or sending other pieces, you can summarize that content, and put that in a notification or other records that you're linking from here. Yeah, so that was showing mainly triggering a flow, how to share that with your organization. We just saw triggering a background flow using the when row is added, modified, or deleted trigger, and tying that to other Dataverse steps and making sure you're still using the right connections that you intend to for that. There's a lot of other parts of the Dataverse connector that we can get into around different actions. But just in the interest of time, I will leave this excellent cheat sheet from Donnie Cahill as a reference. So this walks through every parameter of the Dataverse connector and has great examples. So, for example, all the different filter options as you're working with, all the different data types in Dataverse, and you're filtering rows coming in or listing rows. This syntax is needed currently to send, pass these filters on to Dataverse. And this cheat sheet has a bunch of great examples that make that, really easy to refer to anytime you are working with files, rows, relating other records, those other pieces. And I'll include the links as well to this level up browser extension. So this makes it really easy. Anytime you are looking at a contact record or any other, just viewing the form for this row in Dataverse, it shows you the internal names. So job title has a display name, and then in Dataverse, if you were managing the schema for this, I'll also show within the Power Apps experience, the tables view for contact, you can see how I can manage the schema for this entity. And this is the same place you go if you were creating or modifying other custom entities. I can see a preview of the data here. I can modify the forms. That's where I just was to see that one, the view of one contact. The view was seeing the list page and those layouts for multiple contacts. All that can be managed here. And you can see, especially when you're working with flows, these shortcuts here for copying the schema name, copying the logical name have been added recently that make it really easy to preview the raw metadata for this table, so you can confirm exactly which names as you're building different integrations need to be used, both for the table definition, the column names and other pieces, and for pulling sample data for this table. So anytime you're working with new custom integrations in Dataverse, sometimes it can be helpful to check, make sure you're working with the right internal properties in those pieces from this view, from the Power Apps tables table browser. Yeah, so I mentioned the level up extension, the Dataverse cheat sheet, and XRM Toolbox, another tool that makes it easy, more than just seeing the syntax for things. It has more tools around browsing your tables, creating customizing attributes and things in different ways that are, some handy shortcuts that aren't always available directly from the interface today. So sorry, I know that was a very general overview for some of these pieces of Dataverse, but I hope these resources are new and useful to some of you. Jocelyn, are we okay? I have 2 more slides I can cover, or we can jump to any questions from the group.
Matt, there was a question from Karsten that seems to be related to the thing that you were just showing, the copy X capabilities. Karsten, do you want to jump off mute and...
Yeah, it's certainly something which makes it more reliable to remember the schema name, for instance, and do stuff like this. But it certainly would be even more easier not to go into this experience and leave the other experience. So it would be great to see an improvement in the Dataverse itself, and in terms of select columns, to not really selecting columns in terms of a comma separated, make it really a drop-down mark and drill into the table schema.
Yes,
we
sorry,
have it for other
I should have led with that from our roadmap perspective. So we are looking at making it possible to directly select columns, have a more advanced expression builder where you don't need to use the OData syntax. You can use the same, when you're customizing a view in Dataverse, using a very similar interface to, just add the attributes you want to filter on and save that into the flow. The major improvements we're working on right now are making it possible to connect to other environments from this connector, as well as bringing in this when a row is selected trigger to the latest connector for consistency with all these other pieces, as well as some of the tools to make it easy to migrate from the older versions of the Dataverse connector for folks that have older flows or other integrations running with those older connectors. But yes, these usability pieces around selecting columns, filter rows, these are all pieces that we want to improve. And today, the Open API integration from this part of Power Automate is a separate set of actions. But there's other places where we want to improve the Copilot experience directly within Dataverse and other places as well to save effort and save the need to go copy and parse the schema for here as well. So I guess yeah, I would encourage everyone to take this as a base for working with Dataverse. We're definitely looking to improve a lot of these areas further, but yeah, between these tools and these capabilities that are here, and these new the Open API independent publisher connector and the other integrations coming up. Looking forward to see what you all create and hear your feedback on other areas that this can be streamlined. And sorry, I can't see the chat right now, so if there's any other questions on that or other questions, please feel free to chime in or.
A lot of
John?
people asking for the link to the cheat sheet, but then they found it online.
Oh yeah, sorry, I should have pasted those in directly.
No worries.
Yeah.
I added the links to the documentation that you were referring to as you were referring to it as well. Let me just keep seeing.
And then Karsten had another question. Karsten, do you want to come off and ask that? So when running flows in the context of Dataverse, do you want to ask that?
Yeah, it's surely it's something around the running as a service principle, and when you're dealing with these kind of things, running into multiplexing issues. So I know that we have a kind of a undocumented area here, and it would be great to find more public documents which are talking about the fact when it is best to use which kind of connectivity. Should I use it in context of the user? Should I use it in context of the service principal? And if so, when do I need to make sure not to run into any kind of multiplexing licensing issues?
Definitely. So yes, the current guidance around multiplexing is very much around ensuring that each of the users managing or benefiting involved in the Cloudflow do have a individual per user license if they're using these premium capabilities for advanced connectors, or sorry, premium connectors, including the Dataverse connector in their flows. But definitely, we're working on a guide for scaling Dataverse usage. Anytime you're working with higher volume amount of data, and that'll include some of the steps around service principal interactions, as well as patterns for making batch or bulk calls, or working with some of those other pieces. So yeah, we'll have that added to the public documentation soon. Definitely want to make sure that those steps are clear for folks working with larger data sets and that kind of thing as well.
I've got another question about a weirdly named thing. When you're doing run only and you're setting a flow up for run only, you end up having to create a mail-enabled security group in Exchange. Then you have to go into the Dataverse, and then you got to go to the thing called Teams, and then you've got to make a pretend team up that references the other team that you just enabled in the mail-enabled security group. It does work, and it means then you do all your admin at the Exchange end of the system. Is there any way of making it slightly more seamless so that you don't actually have to create a team and you can actually just recognize that it's a mail-enabled security group? I know this is one of those weird licensing things that you're putting a team inside the Dataverse, which gets confusing when you talk about teams in Microsoft. But the question we've got on this is that it does work, but it just seems a little bit counterintuitive that you have to do it in two places to get something else to work.
Definitely. I know there's a number of parts where we want to make sure that things sync back to AD when possible. But yeah, right now the steps to create a group team in Dataverse where that's not automatically done does require managing in both places. So yeah, I don't know of any short-term improvement that changes that, but that's definitely a pain point that we recognize as well with keeping AD and Dataverse in sync and making sure that when you share and when you're managing these flows, right, you don't need to go create a bunch of other identities just to do basic management pieces, right? And yeah, the less overhead there, the better, right?
Okay, that's great.
Chris, I'm not sure if you had any other comments on that piece around service principal use, or like where the group teams or things are being used with that.
I don't.
Okay. Awesome. Any other questions on the Dataverse connector or other pieces? I guess or I guess any other yeah, any requests that you'd like to see? Any like we talked about the usability pieces and other pieces around making it easier to manage service principals and group teams with Dataverse. Curious if folks have other pieces they'd like to see improved.
The only one I'd like to see improved is the workaround for getting trigger locking to work. You put your when a row is changed, and if you don't work out how to do trigger locking, you're going to get infinite looping. So you want the flow not to run if another column is in a set state, but you then have to put in a filter array action after that step just to build the logic to go back into the settings trigger in the actual Dataverse step. It's the same in SharePoint. That could be made a little bit easier, because that until somebody shows you is a whole big bunch of black magic. You just don't know what it does and whether it requires values or it just requires an actual event of things. But
yeah, so I can speak to one area we want to improve that is making it easier to use. In Dataverse, it's called the pre-image of the change that comes through. So when you have a record changing, we want to make it easy to respond, like query on meaningful changes from what the record was to what it's changed to, which can make it possible to have more scope triggers, avoid infinite loops between states you don't intend. So I think that's the main piece we have around infinite loops, around more scoped triggers that may help with that as well. But definitely, yeah, right now we have a warning that'll appear if you have a table referring to itself later in the flow, but that's I know that's very general. It's just a hint that may happen, but what you're looking for is just making sure that you can scope those pieces, right?
Yeah, the reason this came up was we recently moved a lot of stuff from SharePoint over to Dataverse, and we still find the same issue, is that you modularize your flow. So instead of having one super complicated flow, you've got 3 flows that do 3 different things when the data is in a different state in the same table. But because they're all looking at the same table, you end up trigger locking on an admin column that you've put in that says, all right, when the first action happens, change that column to new. All right, and then the second flow sits and looks at that table and goes, has that row changed? Oh, it's changed, and doesn't even start because it goes, I'm waiting for it to say updated, which happens at the end of another flow, we say. And that's where the trigger locking comes in really useful. But it was just to make it easier to find the values, is the point we're making.
Definitely, yeah. We'll definitely look into how we can make that a little bit smoother, avoiding yeah, we know whenever you have many flows triggering on the same pieces as well, we know it can get kind of hard to see the the whole layout of everything tied to that data, tied to the same tables and things as well. So there's other improvements we want to make that that easier as well.
Right. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. If you have any other comments, I think Jocelyn, you shared my LinkedIn. Feel free to ping through the this community area. I think Jocelyn and I in the Power Automate PM team monitor the Power Automate community. So please feel free to use the ideas and other parts of the Power Automate community forum for any other questions or sharing things you've made. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining